Hey guys, welcome back to Boring History for Sleep, the channel where curiosity meets chronic drowsiness and historical nonsense meets your pillow. Tonight, we're heading south, far south, to a place where ghosts don't hide under beds. They dance under moonlight. This is Africa, the continent that gave the world both humanity and arguably the first customer service system for the dead. Before Halloween was ever spelled with an H, before costumes, candy, or capitalism, Africans were already talking to spirits, and not in a who you gonna call way, more like, welcome home, great-grandfather. Would you like some millet beer? So if you're lying there wondering how people celebrated spooky season before pumpkins became a global brand, the answer is they didn't need pumpkins. They had fire. They had drums. They had ancestors who showed up uninvited but always meant well. Let's go back, way back. Imagine the night before language, before cities, before Netflix. Somewhere on the African savannah, a small fire crackles. The air hums with insects and distant thunder. Families gather in a loose circle. The firelight flickers across their faces, and beyond the glow, the dark feels alive, not threatening, but aware. Someone begins to hum. Another adds a rhythm, tapping a hollow log. Then a voice rises, low, melodic, ancient. It tells of the first people, the first rains, the first time someone realized that life and death might just be part of the same story. That's the root of it all. Before ghosts wore sheets or demanded candy, they were simply family. Invisible, yes, but familiar. You didn't fear them. You fed them. Every culture across the continent had its own version of this relationship. In West Africa, people spoke of the living dead, ancestors who lingered close, watching, guiding, occasionally meddling. In East Africa, families left food and water by the hearth so spirits wouldn't go hungry. In the south, people poured a few drops of beer on the ground before drinking, a toast to those who'd walked before them. Halloween, with its pumpkins and skeletons, is really just the loud sugar-fueled descendant of something Africa had already mastered. The art of remembering the dead without turning it into a horror movie. If you listen closely to the stories that still echo through Africa's nights, you can hear the original soundtrack of spooky season. It's not eerie violins or creaking doors, it's drums. Deep, slow, and steady, like the heartbeat of the earth. The drum was more than music. It was a doorway. Each beat called to the unseen. Each rhythm was an invitation. Come, join us. The fire is warm. The stories are ready, and the spirits, it said, always answered. When the wind moved through the trees, people didn't whisper ghosts. They said the ancestors were passing by. When a candle flickered, it wasn't a draft, it was a greeting. When a shadow crossed the fire, no one screamed. They offered food. That's the thing. Africa's relationship with death was never built on fear. It was built on respect, curiosity, and the quiet understanding that everyone eventually becomes an ancestor. And if you wanted your descendants to treat you well, you'd better behave while alive. So in a way, these early traditions were the original ghost etiquette manuals. Rule 1. Never forget your family. Rule 2. Never show up without a drum. Rule 3. Always bring snacks. Across the continent, seasonal changes marked when the spirit world felt closest. The end of the harvest, the coming of rains, or the dry season stillness. Each moment carried its own kind of magic. People felt it in the wind, saw it in the stars, and celebrated it not as spooky, but as sacred. If you were to stand beneath an African sky back then, no city lights, no noise, just the faint hum of night. you might understand why people believed the world between life and death was thin. The stars were too bright, the air too still, the silence too full. Even the animals seemed to listen. And maybe that's why, thousands of years later, when Europeans began carving faces into vegetables and calling it Halloween, Africa didn't blink. It already knew what it meant to live alongside the dead. It just found the Western version a bit noisy. Tonight, as we travel through stories of spirits and firelight, remember, this isn't a continent haunted by ghosts. It's a continent accompanied by them. They're the whisper in the wind, the laughter behind the drum, the flicker of light in the corner of your room when you think you're alone. So settle in. The ancestors are listening, and they've waited a very long time for you to fall asleep to their story. Perfect. Here are chapters 2 and 3 of Halloween in Africa, Ancient Spirits, New Traditions, Boring History for Sleep. Same voice, rhythm, and cozy historical storytelling as the previous scripts. If you ever find yourself walking through an African night, somewhere far from the city, where the air smells of dust and wood smoke, you might notice something magical. The darkness here isn't empty. It breathes, it hums, and somewhere, not too far away, there's a fire still burning. For thousands of years, these fires have been the heartbeat of African life. They were places of warmth, of stories, and, most of all, of connection. But tonight, we're not talking about just any fire. We're talking about the night fires, those lit not for cooking or comfort, but for conversation with the unseen. Long before Halloween made its way into suburban calendars, African families already knew that certain nights belonged to the dead. Not in a frightening way, but in the same way that Sundays belong to church or mornings to coffee. They were nights of return. The ancestors came home, quietly, respectfully, with a presence felt more than seen. Imagine a clearing just beyond the last huts of a village. The air is cool, the stars bright enough to make you squint. At the center burns a low fire, surrounded by people sitting in a wide circle. Children leaning on their mothers, elders wrapped in cloth, the crackle of wood like soft punctuation to the night's silence. The eldest among them rises, slow but steady, and sprinkles something into the flames, a pinch of grain, a few drops of beer, perhaps a small piece of meat. It's an offering, not a sacrifice. A gesture that says, "We remember you, we're still listening." And as the smoke rises, it curls and twists like a message on its way to the other side. In places like Ghana, Nigeria, and Senegal, fire has always been more than heat. It's the line between the living and the departed, thin, warm, and flickering. They call upon it when the harvest is done and the year begins to wane. It's the moment when the world itself seems to hold its breath, when the sun lingers a little less each day and people feel deep in their bones that the seasons are changing hands. In that soft in-between time, the fires come alive. Children are told to sit quietly because laughter carries far, and sometimes the ancestors might answer. They don't appear in white sheets or rattling chains. They come in whispers, in a gust of wind that moves only one person's hair, in a sudden warmth against the cheek, in the flicker of flame that seems to nod in rhythm with an old song. For most of the world, the idea of ghosts brings fear. But here, the dead are family. You don't scream when your grandmother visits. You make sure her chair is ready. The fires are how families kept that relationship glowing. Each flame was a small door, open just wide enough for memory to step through, and the stories told around them. Those were the keys. Every tale began the same way, slow, rhythmic, the voice rising and falling like waves. The old storyteller would lean toward the fire, his face half in shadow, half in light, and say something like, "Once, long ago, when the world was new and people still listened to the earth." And everyone would listen, because in that moment, it wasn't just the storyteller speaking, it was the ancestors borrowing his breath to remind the living of who they were. Some stories were warnings about greed, pride, or the dangers of forgetting where you came from. Others were gentle, even funny. One popular tale told of a man who tried to hide from death by digging a hole so deep that he accidentally tunneled straight into the ancestors' kitchen. They laughed and sent him home with leftovers. These weren't horror stories. They were lullabies for grown-ups, reminders that death wasn't darkness, only distance. In West African belief, the ancestors aren't trapped in graves. They move freely, just beyond sight. And as long as someone remembers them, they stay close, offering protection, guidance, and, when necessary, a little nudge in the form of bad luck to those who misbehave. That's the quiet genius of these night fires. They turn remembrance into ritual, and ritual into comfort. As the hours pass, the fire burns lower. The younger ones start to nod off, their heads resting on parents' shoulders. Sparks drift upward, joining the stars. Somewhere beyond the light, a hyena laughs, sharp, distant, oddly cheerful. The elders chuckle too, because even that laugh, to them, is part of the night's music. Before the last log fades, someone murmurs a prayer, not loud, not dramatic, just a few words carried on the smoke. Stay with us, guide us, come again. The embers glow red like tiny hearts. Then the fire sighs, and the night folds itself gently around the people who remain. If you stood there at the edge of that clearing, you'd feel it. The calm weight of something ancient and kind pressing softly against the world. It's not haunting, it's presence. The night fires of the ancestors didn't aim to frighten anyone. They existed to remind the living that they were never truly alone. And maybe that's the truest kind of magic. Not the kind that makes you jump, but the kind that makes you feel seen, even in the dark. So next time you see a flickering candle or the orange glow of a bonfire, think of this. Somewhere, long before Halloween had a name, someone was sitting quietly by the flames, whispering a story into the smoke, trusting that someone, somewhere, was listening. And maybe, just maybe, they still are. If Africa had an official department for the afterlife, it would have been headquartered in ancient Egypt, complete with gold ceilings, jackal-headed administrators, and a waiting room full of very polite mummies. The Egyptians, you see, didn't just believe in life after death. They planned for it, extensively, obsessively, with the kind of commitment that would make a modern wedding planner weep. To them, dying wasn't the end. It was simply a change of address. You moved from the dusty side of the Nile to a realm of endless light, music, and possibly unlimited beer. But before you got there, there was paperwork, cosmic paperwork. Let's start with the basics. Every Egyptian, from pharaoh to farmer, believed they had a Kai, a life force, a kind of spiritual twin that needed food, comfort, and respect even after death. You couldn't just die and expect your car to fend for itself. You had to build it a house, a tomb, and fill that house with everything it might want for eternity. That's why the pyramids exist, not as monuments to death, but as eternal care packages for very demanding souls. Inside those tombs, the dead were treated better than most living people are today. They got fresh linens, scented oils, amulets for protection, and even little carved servants called ushabti, tiny figurines whose only job was to do your chores in the afterlife. Imagine dying and still managing to outsource your laundry. That's efficiency. At night, when the desert cooled and the stars burned sharp and white over the Nile, people believed the spirit stirred. The tombs, silent by day, came alive in the moonlight. A rustle of linen here, a whisper of sand there, like the country itself breathing through the ages. Unlike the Western ghosts that go boo, Egyptian spirits were bureaucratic. They had structure. If you were a restless soul, you didn't haunt random houses. You filed a complaint. Yes, really. Archaeologists have found letters to the dead, written on bowls and papyrus, where people asked their departed relatives for help or forgiveness. Dear Mother, please stop making the roof leak. I've left extra bread by the altar. Love, your son. It's comforting in a way. Egyptians didn't fear their dead. They corresponded with them. They sent prayers, meals, and updates like ancient text messages carried by incense smoke. And then there were the pharaohs, the overachievers of eternity. For them, the afterlife wasn't just a spiritual concept, it was an empire. Every brick of every pyramid was a promise that the ruler would rise again, as radiant as the sun god Ra, sailing across the heavens on a golden boat. You can almost picture it. The night wind sweeping across the sands, the stars reflecting off smooth limestone, and somewhere beneath, a king lies perfectly still, arms crossed, eyes painted open, waiting for the dawn that will never end. Halloween might have jack-o'-lanterns, but Egypt had tombs that literally glowed. Torches burned along corridors painted with blue skies and golden suns, so the dead would never feel lost. Gods guarded every doorway. Anubis, jackal-headed and calm. Osiris, green-skinned and patient. Isis, radiant and weary from granting too many resurrections. These weren't monsters. They were guides. In Egyptian belief, death was a journey, and everyone needed directions, preferably written in a handy manual called the Book of the Dead. It contained passwords for gates, instructions for rituals, and even sample speeches for your final interview with the gods. Picture it like this: the afterlife as airport security. You stand before the scales of justice, while Anubis checks your heart against the feather of truth. If it's lighter, congratulations, eternal paradise. If it's heavier, well, your lunch for a crocodile-headed monster named Amit. No pressure. And yet, despite the bureaucracy, the Egyptians found beauty in death. The walls of tombs weren't filled with despair. They were filled with color. Deep blues for the night sky, reds for power, golds for divinity. The afterlife wasn't grim. It was vibrant. Halloween, by comparison, seems like a pale imitation, a costume party with cheaper candles. Even the mummies themselves weren't supposed to scare anyone. They were simply well-preserved travelers, wrapped for comfort, not terror. The modern world made them creepy. The ancient world made them sacred. Each layer of linen was a prayer, a wish, a whisper of love. Sometimes, though, you can't help but imagine the scene: the desert night, the distant wail of a jackal, a faint rattle from inside a sealed tomb. Somewhere, a curious breeze slips through a crack and stirs a centuries-old bandage. A soft sigh escapes the stone. And for one brief heartbeat, history feels awake. That's not horror. That's memory, the oldest kind. Egypt understood something that many cultures forgot: that death, handled properly, isn't frightening at all. It's continuity, it's organization, it's eternal project management. Even now, archaeologists crawl through dusty corridors, shining flashlights on walls painted with stories of the dead. only to realize those stories were never meant for the living. They were bedtime tales for souls, lullabies for eternity. And if you listen closely, even today, you might hear the whisper of linen against stone. Not a curse, not a warning, but a sigh of satisfaction. Because in Egypt, no spirit was ever truly forgotten. So when you think of mummies, think less monster movie and more immortal family portrait. The ancient Egyptians didn't fear ghosts. They invited them in, gave them gold, and made sure they were comfortable for the next 10,000 years. And maybe, in their own strange, meticulous way, they invented something even better than Halloween. A world where the dead never stop glowing, and the living never stop remembering. If Egypt was the land of golden tombs and divine paperwork, then Nubia, its southern neighbor, was the land of quiet mystery. It stretched along the Nile between what is now southern Egypt and northern Sudan, where the desert met the river and time seemed to move just a little slower. At night, the air here feels different. It's heavy with the scent of water and sand. A strange contradiction that only makes sense if you've stood beside the Nile in the dark. The surface looks like black glass, smooth and endless, while the wind carries faint sounds from faraway villages. A drumbeat, a song, a low hum that might be human, or might be the river itself whispering. For the Nubians, water wasn't just water. It was a living boundary, a shimmering curtain between the world of the living and the world of the remembered. And on certain nights, when the moon hung like a silver bowl above the water, that boundary grew thin. They believed the souls of the departed traveled along the river on their way to the afterlife, not by boat, but by memory. Each ripple carried a story. Each current carried a name. When someone passed away, their family would gather near the banks, lighting lamps made from clay and oil. They'd set them gently on the water's surface and watch as the little flames floated downstream. A soft procession of light winding through the dark. It wasn't mourning, it was navigation. The lamps guided the soul toward the horizon, toward the lands where ancestors waited, patient as stars. If you picture Halloween as a night of masks and shadows, imagine this instead: the sound of gentle water, the glow of floating fire, and a silence so deep it feels sacred. That's how Nubia marked the thin place between worlds, quietly, beautifully, with a kind of grace that modern life rarely remembers. In their stories, the Nile itself was alive, a being of moods and temper. When it flooded, it was generous. When it receded, it was thoughtful. When it roared, it was angry. And when it was still, perfectly still, people said the river was listening. And so they spoke to it. They threw handfuls of grain into the current, or poured a few drops of milk or beer. They asked the river to carry their words to loved ones beyond sight. It was the original long-distance call, powered by gravity, faith, and a little hydrodynamics. In the cool season, after harvest, when fields lay bare and nights stretched long, families gathered outside their mud brick homes. They told stories of kings who built cities from sand and sunlight, of queens who ruled with the wisdom of gods, and of river spirits that could appear as crocodiles, birds, or shimmering figures that walked across the water like mist. One tale tells of a fisherman who cast his net late at night and caught a voice instead of a fish. The voice asked politely to be let go. The fisherman, being practical, asked what he'd get in return. The voice said, "A promise that you'll never go hungry." And from that day on, he didn't. His nets were always full, his family always fed, and every year he threw the first fish back into the river with a whispered thank you. It's a story told quietly between sips of warm beer and the crackle of small fires. No drama, no thunder, just that feeling that somewhere beneath the calm surface, something ancient is still listening. When archaeologists first dug through Nubian tombs, they found artifacts that mirrored Egypt's grandeur, but with a softer touch. Fewer gold masks, more painted pottery, more songs carved into stone. The inscriptions often spoke not of gods and conquest, but of family. "May my mother's laughter find me in the west," one said. "May my father's voice be the wind." You don't write words like that if you think death is an ending. You write them if you know it's a reunion. As the night deepens, the fires along the riverbank burn lower. Somewhere in the distance, a crocodile slips into the water with barely a sound. Its scales catch the moonlight, silver, then black, then gone. Children drift to sleep in their mother's arms. The elders' voices slow to murmurs. Even the river seems to hush, like it's waiting for the final word of the final story. And when it comes, it's simple. "Good night, old ones. We'll meet again," when the river turns. Then the lamps are extinguished, one by one, until only the stars remain, a reflection of light above and below, a reminder that heaven might not be somewhere else at all. It might just be water, gently moving. If you listen closely, you can still hear it. That faint, eternal whisper of the Nile. Not loud enough to wake you, but just enough to remind you that life and death have always shared the same current. The river flows, the souls return, and every ripple carries both the past and the promise of tomorrow. So as you close your eyes tonight, picture that. A dark river, quiet as breath, carrying thousands of tiny lamps into the horizon. Each one a name, a prayer, a soft flicker of memory. And somewhere on the shore, the living watch and smile, knowing that the ancestors will find their way home. If the Nile was the river that connected worlds, then West Africa was the stage where those worlds danced together. Here, the boundary between the living and the dead wasn't a line. It was a rhythm. You could feel it in the drumbeat, taste it in the air thick with smoke and palm wine, and see it swirling through the dust in the shape of something, or someone, not quite human. This was the land of the masquerades, the kingdom of masks, and on certain nights, the spirits didn't just whisper, they performed. In places like Nigeria, Benin, and Togo, entire villages prepared for weeks for these nights, sewing costumes, carving wooden faces, polishing shells and mirrors that would later catch the moonlight. Each mask represented an ancestor or spirit, and each performance was a reunion, part theatre, part prayer, part family visit, with really good choreography. The people called them Egungun, the ancestors made visible. When the dancers appeared, covered head to toe in layered fabrics that shimmered and rustled like wind in tall grass, everyone fell silent. The crowd didn't see people anymore. They saw memory itself walking. Imagine it. The air is warm and thick with drum beats, low, steady, like a second heartbeat beneath your own. Children cling to their mother's skirts, wide-eyed. The first dancer steps forward, a tower of colour and motion. Fabrics swirl, bells jingle, and the dust rises in soft clouds around his feet. He turns, and the mask flashes in the firelight. A face carved with calm, ancient eyes. The crowd exhales as one, because in that moment, the dead have come home. Each mask has a story. Some represent healers, others warriors, others tricksters who can't quite resist showing off. There are masks that bless, masks that warn, masks that make you laugh until your ribs hurt. Because even in the spirit world, apparently, someone's always the comedian. The dancers don't speak. They move. Every turn, every stomp, every sudden freeze is a sentence in a language of dust and motion. The drummers answer, faster, slower, teasing the spirits into revealing themselves. At first glance, it might look like chaos. Swirling fabrics, pounding drums, people shouting praise names into the night. But there's deep order beneath it. Each gesture has meaning. Each beat follows a rhythm older than the village itself. The whole thing feels like a memory the earth keeps replaying every year, just to remind everyone who they are. Sometimes, the masquerades appear suddenly, unannounced. You could be walking home from the fields, the sun just a red sliver on the horizon, when the air shifts, a gust of wind, a flicker of movement. Then, from between the trees, a figure steps out, bright, layered, otherworldly. The drummers appear as if from nowhere, and the dance begins again. It's not fear that people feel in that moment. It's awe, that electric shiver that runs through you when you sense that something much larger, much older, just brushed past. In a way, the Egungun are West Africa's original Halloween costumes. Except instead of pretending to be ghosts, people become them. And instead of begging for candy, they give blessings, warnings, and sometimes gentle insults. Because even the spirits appreciate good humor. And oh, the colors. No haunted house could ever match the spectacle of an Egungun night. Scarlet and indigo cloths shimmer in torchlight. Gold sequins flash like sparks. Cowrie shells clink softly with every movement. When the wind blows, the layers ripple like flames, and for a heartbeat, you're not sure whether you're looking at fabric or fire. The masquerade moves through the village like a storm, dancing into courtyards, pausing before doorways, spinning so fast the fabric lifts and hovers like the spirit might truly be taking flight. Children giggle, elders nod, murmuring blessings under their breath. Someone plays a wooden flute that sounds faintly like laughter. When the dance ends, the masks bow. Slowly, then they turn and leave, vanishing into the dark as quietly as they arrived. No one follows. No one speaks for a moment. The silence feels heavy but kind, the way a hug feels when it lingers a little too long. Later, people will sit around small fires, replaying every detail. Did you see the red one spin? Did you hear what the drummer played? I swear that mask looked right at me. And maybe it did, because the point of the masquerade isn't performance. It's reminder that life is temporary, but lineage isn't. That you stand on the shoulders of those who came before, and that the boundary between the two worlds isn't made of stone. It's made of rhythm. If you could watch from above, the dark village, the flickering fires, the trails of fabric catching light, you might see it clearly. A constellation made not of stars, but of people and spirits moving together in time. It's easy to think of Halloween as a night of fear, of ghosts that haunt. But here, in West Africa, the ghosts don't haunt, they visit. They come home to dance. And when the drums finally fade, the villagers return to their homes, hearts lighter, the air still trembling from the rhythm. Somewhere, a single drumbeat echoes from far away. One last heartbeat from the ancestors before the world falls quiet again. And as the embers die and the moon drifts overhead, the people know. The masks are gone, but the spirits are still here, watching, listening, waiting for the next dance. Somewhere in the heart of West Africa, the drums never really stop. They just rest between breaths, and when they begin again, that deep, chest-thumping rhythm that makes the air itself vibrate, You know something is about to cross over. This is the moment the ancestors join the living, not as shadows, not as voices, but as motion. Because here, when the ancestors visit, they don't whisper through walls or flicker in candlelight. They dance. It begins slowly. A single beat, soft as a heartbeat. Then another, then a dozen. The sound gathers like a storm, steady, patient, impossible to ignore. Dust rises from the ground, carrying the smell of earth and rain. Children climb onto rooftops for a better view. The elders take their places, wrapped in cloth that has seen many such nights. And then, the masks appear. You could swear they come out of the ground itself. Layers of colour sway and shimmer in the half-light, the edges catching the glow of torches. The dancers don't walk, they glide. Each step seems guided by something older than muscle or music. To outsiders, it might look like chaos. Swirling fabric, flailing arms, the unrelenting thump of drums. But those who are born here know better. This is choreography written by memory. Every movement says a word. We are here. We remember. We return. The Egungun, the masked ancestors, move through the crowd, their cloths brushing against outstretched hands. Touching the fabric is said to bring blessing, though a few mischievous spirits like to chase anyone who gets too close, just to remind them that even the afterlife enjoys a good laugh. One dancer stops before a woman and bends low, the layers of cloth almost touching the ground. She bows back, whispering the name of her father, gone many years. The dancer tilts his mask just slightly, a gesture of recognition, before spinning away again. The woman smiles through tears, because whether that really was her father's spirit, or just a skilled neighbour in costume doesn't matter. For those few moments, belief and reality are one. The night deepens, the drums grow faster. It's as if the entire village has become one body, one rhythm. Every stomp sends a pulse through the ground. Every clap feels like thunder rolling through human hands. Somewhere, someone starts singing. A high, trembling melody that floats above the beat like smoke. The crowd joins in, voices overlapping, imperfect but perfect in their unity. This is not a show. It's communion. 1,000 years of ancestors watching, nodding, swaying in time from the unseen edge of the firelight. And yet, for all its sacredness, there's humour here too. That soft, human laughter that keeps fear at bay. One Egungun pretends to trip, sending children squealing. Another mimics the chief's walk, earning a round of laughter even from the chief himself. Because what's the point of eternal life if you can't have a little fun with it? As midnight approaches, the air thickens. The drums slow, the flames burn lower. It's said that this is the hour when the ancestors speak most clearly. Not in words, but in feeling. You can sense them in the warmth that lingers after the fire pops, in the way the breeze touches your cheek, like a hand that remembers you. The dancers begin their final circle, each mask bowing toward the elders. The drummers strike one last cascade of rhythm, then stop, abruptly. For a heartbeat, silence hangs. No wind, no movement, just the echo of everything that came before. And then, applause? No. Only sighs, the kind that carry gratitude. People step forward to sprinkle water onto the earth, cooling the dust, sealing the night. One by one, the dancers vanish back into the darkness between huts, where the firelight can't reach. Some say that when the villagers sleep, the ancestors keep dancing. Invisible now, but no less real. They dance for the newborns who will one day join them. They dance for the forgotten, whose names still deserve a song. They dance for the simple joy of being remembered. By morning, the village will look ordinary again, Chickens pecking, smoke rising, children chasing goats through the yard. But the air will still hum faintly, like the last note of a song you can't get out of your head. And if you stand quietly at dawn, you might hear it, that ghost of a rhythm under the waking sounds of life, a drumbeat without a drummer, a dance without a dancer. That's how you know the ancestors are still here, shaking off the dust of eternity, smiling to themselves. Because in this part of the world, ghosts don't linger in shadows. They live in motion. They are the pulse in the earth, the sway of the body, the echo in your chest that reminds you you're part of something much older than fear. So the next time you feel a chill when music starts, don't worry. It might not be the cold. It might just be someone very old and very kind, taking your hand and saying, "Come, dance with me." When the last drumbeat fades and the masks are folded away, the land itself takes a deep breath. The air softens, the fields shimmer gold, and you can almost hear the earth sigh, tired, generous, ready to rest. It's harvest time. Across much of Africa, this is the season of both endings and beginnings. When the soil's work is done, when grain fills the baskets, and when families gather to give thanks to the invisible hands that helped them through the year. But harvest is never just about food. It's about balance. It's the time when people remember that every ear of corn, every yam, every drop of rain exists because the ancestors are still doing their quiet work from the other side. You can think of it as the original Halloween. Not about ghosts that scare, but ghosts that sustain. In the wide plains of Nigeria, families celebrate the new yam festival. The first yams of the season are sacred. No one dares eat them until the gods and ancestors have been served first. So early in the morning, before the sun fully rises, the women gather outside with baskets full of spotless tubers. They roast or boil them, seasoning lightly with oil and pepper, and lay the dishes before a small shrine. Then, in a soft, melodic chant, they invite the ancestors to eat first. Only after the smoke curls upward, a sign that the spirits have accepted, do the living sit down to feast. If you close your eyes, you can almost feel it, the hum of conversation, the clatter of wooden bowls, the rich, sweet smell of roasted yam drifting on warm air. There's laughter, of course, the kind that comes easy when the barns are full and the future feels generous. Children chase chickens through the yard. Drummers test out rhythms that will later become songs. And somewhere, a grandmother sits back, nodding in approval, because she knows this joy belongs not just to the living, but to every ancestor whose sweat still lives in the soil. Further south, among the Shona people of Zimbabwe, the same gratitude takes a quieter shape. When the grain is threshed and the beer brewed, elders hold a ceremony called bira, an all-night gathering where they invite ancestral spirits to join the celebration. They pour the first cup of millet beer onto the ground, calling names in rhythmic murmurs. The air grows thick with the smell of fermentation and memory. Then, as the drums begin to play, something changes. The mood shifts. It's said that the ancestors enter, not as ghosts, but through possession. A trembling hand, a different tone of voice, a sudden stillness that says someone else has stepped into the room. To Western ears, it might sound strange, but here, it's just family visiting. Through borrowed hands, borrowed words, borrowed dances, and when morning comes and the last embers cool, everyone feels lighter, because for one night, the line between here and there was erased by song. It's not hard to see why the harvest has always carried that mystical weight. When you live close to the land, You can feel its moods. The soil gives, the soil withholds, and sometimes, when it rains at just the right moment, it feels like someone up there made a special exception, just for you. So Africans don't celebrate harvest just to say thank you. They celebrate to say, we noticed. There's also a bit of superstition in it, of course. If you forget the ancestors, the next season might not be as kind. A goat might fall ill. The rains might hesitate. And somewhere, someone will mutter, "Ah, they forgot to share their yam." It's not a curse, it's a reminder. Because in African thought, gratitude is not a word, it's maintenance. It keeps the bridge between worlds from cracking. Even today, in modern cities where people work under fluorescent lights instead of sun, echoes of the old harvest rituals remain. A grandmother still pours the first sip of drink onto the ground before taking her own. A farmer still saves the biggest pumpkin for his ancestors. And on quiet evenings, when the lights flicker, someone always jokes, "They're here again, checking if we remembered." Maybe that's why African harvest festivals never feel haunted, even though they're full of spirits. They're warm, familiar. The dead aren't strangers. They're shareholders. Picture it now, the last night of the festival. The fields are bare but glowing under a full moon. The drums are gone, replaced by crickets, and the soft hum of wind through dry stalks. A few fires burn low in the distance, their smoke curling up like pale ribbons toward the stars. Families sit in small groups, talking quietly. The air smells of ash and sweet beer. Someone yawns, someone else laughs softly, and for a moment, you can almost see them. Faint figures sitting among the living, listening, smiling. They're not here to scare or judge. They're here to rest, to remember, and maybe to steal a bite of yam while no one's looking. In the West, Halloween marks the dying of the year, a time of fear, of ghosts knocking at the door. But here, the ghosts have keys. They don't knock, they come home. And when the last candle dies and the night grows cool, the earth itself exhales, full, content, at peace, because it knows that for one night, everything that ever lived has come back to say thank you. In the south of Africa, the night speaks in clicks, whispers, and the soft clatter of bones on earth. Here, when people want to hear from the ancestors, they don't stare into mirrors or shuffle cards. They listen to bones. It's called throwing the bones. And it's not a game. It's communication. A conversation that travels backward through generations, landing softly in the lap of the living. Picture a small hut at the edge of a village, its thatched roof silvered by moonlight. Inside, the air smells of herbs, smoke, and something faintly sweet, the scent of burning impefo, a sacred plant used to summon calm and connection. The diviner, the sangoma, sits cross-legged on a woven mat. Around her are bones, shells, coins, bits of carved wood, tiny animal figures, each one a piece of the universe condensed into an object. Outside, the world is quiet. Inside, time holds its breath. A visitor enters, nervous, respectful. They might be seeking healing, guidance, or a sign from someone who has passed. They hand the diviner a coin, a token, or sometimes just their question, whispered like a secret. The sangoma nods slowly, then gathers the bones in both hands. A soft rattle, a pause, and releases them onto the mat. The sound is gentle but final, like rain hitting dry soil. Every piece lands differently. One on its back, one face up, one slightly apart from the rest. To the untrained eye, it looks random. But to the diviner, it's a map. The ancestors have answered, she says softly. In that moment, the ordinary world feels suspended. The walls hum, the smoke swirls in slow spirals, and even the insects outside seem to hush. Each bone's position tells a story, one for the past, one for the future, one for the person who asked, and one for the spirit who replied. The diviner reads them like an ancient text, not with fear, but with familiarity. Sometimes the message is simple: be patient. The river is still rising. Other times it's specific. Your grandmother says to stop lending your tools to that neighbor who never returns them. Spirits, it seems, have opinions, an excellent memory. For outsiders, it can look mysterious, even eerie. But for those who grew up with it, bone divination isn't superstition. It's family therapy, guided by people who happen to live slightly outside of time. The bones themselves tell their own stories. Some belong to goats or birds. Others are carved from ivory or stone. Each one has been touched by ritual, smoke, and song. They're not symbols, they're companions. Over years of practice, they absorb energy, memory, personality. By the time a diviner throws them, they're less objects and more old friends returning to gossip. And gossip, it turns out, is sacred. In the cosmology of the Zulu, Xhosa, and Tswana peoples, the ancestors are the true intermediaries between humans and God. You don't bother the Creator with small problems. You talk to those who've been here before. They understand traffic, heartbreak, and bad harvests better than anyone in heaven ever could. That's why the Sangoma's hut feels less like a place of magic and more like a family living room. Warm, smoky, and slightly crowded with unseen guests. Each reading ends the same way: a quiet thanks, a small offering of snuff or beer, and the faint, rhythmic hum of gratitude. Outside, the stars burn sharp and low. The Southern Cross hangs above the horizon like a compass pointing home. Somewhere nearby, a jackal calls, that strange, lonely sound that carries for miles across the veld. The Sangoma listens and smiles. "They're talking too," she murmurs. "They always talk." Not every question has an answer, of course. Sometimes the bones fall in silence, scattered, unreadable. The diviner will nod, sweep them gently together and say, "They don't wish to speak tonight, because in this relationship, even the dead have boundaries." Still, there's comfort in the ritual, in the idea that when the world grows confusing, there's always someone or something willing to listen. Think of it, a people who never forgot that wisdom doesn't die when bodies do. That memory can be held not just in books or songs, but in the smooth surface of a bone worn soft by generations of hands. Halloween, in its noisy modern form, talks about summoning spirits with Ouija boards and haunted houses. But here, summoning is replaced by inviting. The ancestors aren't summoned, they're consulted. They arrive not with rattling chains, but with patience, precision, and impeccable timing. The next morning, the Sangoma will sweep the floor clean, gather her bones, and place them in a small leather pouch. She'll hang them near the fire so they stay warm, because cold bones, she'll tell you, make slow spirits. As the day brightens, the village comes alive again. Roosters crowing, laughter echoing, pots clinking. Life moves on, as it always does. But somewhere inside that hut, a faint smell of sage and smoke remains, and with it, the comforting thought that no one here is ever truly alone. Because in this part of the world, when people say the ancestors are watching, they don't mean it as a warning. They mean it as a promise. In the rolling hills of KwaZulu-Natal, South Africa, the wind never seems to stop moving. It slides through tall grass, rustles trees, whistles across the roofs of round huts, as if the land itself were breathing softly endlessly. The Zulu people have a saying, Umoya uyafila, the wind is alive, and in that wind they believe the ancestors speak, not in words but in feelings, a sudden chill, a shiver, a whisper that isn't quite a sound. To live here is to accept that the world is layered, the visible, the invisible, and the space in between where the two meet for tea. If you walk these hills at dusk, you might see small fires glowing on distant slopes. They look ordinary at first, just shepherds warming themselves or families cooking dinner. But to the Zulu, each fire carries another meaning. It's a light for the spirits, a beacon that says, we remember you, the path home is still clear. Because for the Zulu, the ancestors don't simply rest in peace. They remain active, curious, and occasionally meddlesome, like extended family members who moved out but never really left. They're called Amadlozi, or sometimes Izinyanya, and they're not abstract forces. They're your people, your grandmother who used to hum while grinding maize, your uncle who told terrible jokes, your great-grandfather whose name you still carry, when things go wrong, when crops fail, when cattle fall ill, when your luck turns sour. It's never just bad fortune. It's a message. The ancestors, people say, are tapping on the walls of your life, asking, did you forget to greet us? So you greet them. A Zulu family might hold a ceremony called Imbeliko to introduce a newborn to the ancestors. A goat is offered, its spirit joining the unseen crowd that's gathered to meet the child. The eldest speaks softly into the air. This is your blood. Watch over them. Walk with them. And somewhere, just at the edge of hearing, the hills seem to answer. A low hum, a shift in the grass, a sigh of acceptance. Later, when life grows difficult, another ceremony is held. Ukupala. The family gathers again, perhaps in the courtyard or by the cattle enclosure, because the Zulu believe the ancestors live close to the herd. They pour traditional beer onto the ground, watching it soak into the dust. They speak aloud, names first, always names, because to call someone by name is to remind the universe they still exist. Father of my father, they might begin. You who walked before me, hear us. The cattle are thin, the rain has not come. Please speak to the clouds. Then they wait. It's never dramatic. No thunderclap, no ghostly apparition. But maybe a few days later, the first drops of rain hit the thatch roof, and everyone smiles knowingly. Coincidence? Possibly. But here, coincidence is just another word for faith that worked. The Zulu don't fear their spirits. They respect them, even tease them. When lightning strikes a tree, someone might say, "Ah, the ancestors are clearing their throats." When a sudden gust of wind knocks over a pot, a grandmother chuckles, "They wanted another serving." It's not superstition, it's relationship. A daily reminder that the living and the dead are on the same WhatsApp group. The ancestors just prefer voice notes. There are places, though, where the air feels heavier, places people avoid after dark, hollows between hills where the mist lingers too long, or giant trees that seem to hum when the moon is high. These are said to be Amathongo places, where spirits gather to rest. Walk there at night, and you might feel a brush of cold air across your cheek, or hear soft footsteps behind you when no one's there. Don't panic, don't run. Just say softly, "Sanibanani, Madlozi." Greetings, ancestors, then keep walking, because fear here is seen as disrespect. You don't fear the ones who built your house, you just mind your manners. There's beauty in that, in living with the constant awareness that every hill, every gust, every shadow might be carrying someone's memory. It makes life gentler, slower. You don't rush through a world that's full of listening ears. On certain nights, the ones when the moon hangs low and the sky feels too wide, people say the ancestors visit more directly. Dogs bark for no reason. Doors creak open. A familiar smell fills the house. Smoke, or lavender, or the perfume your mother used to wear. No one is frightened. Someone simply lights a candle and says, "Welcome home." And somewhere, deep in the hills, the wind carries laughter, the sound of spirits talking among themselves, pleased to be remembered. The Western world made ghosts into monsters. But here, in the soft air of KwaZulu-Natal, ghosts are just relatives with good timing. So if you ever find yourself walking those green hills, and the wind brushes past your ear like someone whispering your name, don't worry, it's not a haunting, it's a hello. And if you whisper hello back, the hills might just sigh in contentment. One long, slow exhale that drifts into the night. Because here, the spirits never left. They just learned how to hide in the wind. If Africa has a rooftop, it's Ethiopia. A land of blue mountains, deep valleys, and air so thin, it feels like a prayer. At night, the highlands turn silver. The wind glides over stone churches carved into cliffs, through narrow alleys scented with coffee and incense, and into courtyards where candles still burn long after the singing has stopped. This is a country where faith has lived for thousands of years, older than most of the world's calendars, older even than the word Halloween. And yet, when October draws near and the rains fade, Ethiopia celebrates its own kind of Night of the Dead, one where saints and spirits, angels and ancestors seem to walk side by side. Here, death was never the end of the story. It was simply the beginning of another chapter. Written in Ge'ez script, sung in slow melodic tones that vibrate through the stone walls of ancient churches, long before missionaries ever mentioned All Saints' Day, Ethiopians already held nights of remembrance for the departed. Families gathered at dusk, lighting candles outside their homes. Each flame represented a soul, a loved one who had journeyed onward but still kept watch. The streets would shimmer softly, lined with light, and if you looked from a distance, it seemed as though the entire city were breathing. Some called it Hida Tzion, the feast of St. Mary in November. Others remembered it through Meskel, the finding of the true cross, when bonfires rose high into the cold night air. But whatever the name, the feeling was the same. Gratitude, reverence, and a gentle sadness that didn't sting. Ethiopia's Christianity runs deep. It's as old as the 4th century, and it never forgot its roots in the soil of Africa. Its saints wear robes of white cotton instead of gold. Its priests carry crosses carved from olive wood instead of jewels. And its ghosts, well, they tend to behave. In Ethiopian folklore, spirits aren't monsters lurking in the dark. They're reminders of unfinished kindness. A woman who never got to forgive. A father who worried too much about his children. A shepherd who loved his flock so fiercely that even death couldn't make him rest. They linger not to scare, but to stay involved. During the holy nights, families bake dabo, round loaves of bread, and brew thick, fragrant coffee. They set a small portion aside for the departed. Not out of superstition, but courtesy. Because hospitality, here, doesn't stop at the grave. If you were to walk through a village on one of these nights, you'd hear the low chant of mesmer hymns drifting through the dark, slow, rising and falling like waves. Each note seems to hang in the air, glowing faintly, like something you can almost see. The sound mingles with the crackle of bonfires and the soft murmur of prayers. It's not haunting, it's home. Children watch wide-eyed as elders trace the sign of the cross in the air. The flames flicker against their faces, half lit, half shadow, as though they too are balancing between two worlds. Dogs lie curled near doorways, their ears twitching to the rhythm of the chants. Even the night seems to lean closer, listening. In the small towns near Lalibela, where churches are carved directly from solid rock, the celebrations take on an otherworldly glow. Priests in white robes carry lanterns through tunnels that echo like throats of stone. The light bounces off walls etched with ancient crosses and faint graffiti from centuries ago. Proof that even pilgrims get bored sometimes. The air smells of frankincense and cold earth. People move slowly, reverently, like shadows learning how to walk. When they reach the church courtyard, the chanting rises again, deeper, fuller, vibrating in your chest, until you forget where your heartbeat ends and the hymn begins. At midnight, the prayers pause. Silence falls, thick, complete, like velvet. Then comes the faintest sound, the rustle of wind across the highlands, brushing past the candles, making their flames bend and tremble. That's when people whisper that the saints are passing by. Tall, quiet, invisible. They move through the crowd like breath, blessing as they go. Some say you can feel it, a light touch on your shoulder, a warmth on your cheek. Others say it's just the wind, but everyone smiles either way. Because whether it's holiness or weather, both feel like grace. In these moments, the line between devotion and folklore blurs beautifully. The old beliefs of spirits, ancestors, and the thin places between worlds never really left. They just put on white robes and started singing in church. When the sun finally begins to rise over the mountains, the last candles burn low. Smoke drifts lazily upward, carrying prayers, memories, and maybe a few unspoken regrets. The people walk home quietly, the hem of their garments brushing against the dew-soaked grass. Some will stop to share coffee. Others will sit in silence and watch the sky turn gold. And somewhere, in the faint light of dawn, you can imagine the ancestors doing the same. Sitting in their own world, sipping the same coffee, smiling at how little has changed. Because in Ethiopia, faith and family, saints and spirits, all drink from the same cup. The dead are not gone. They're just waiting for the next song. And when the wind blows through the highlands, whispering softly through the tall grass and distant bells, you can almost hear them, the saintly shadows of the mountains. Still singing, still glowing, still home. The desert at night is not quiet. It only pretends to be. If you stand in the middle of the Sahara after sunset, the first thing you notice is the absence of sound. No birds, no water, no trees to whisper. But wait a little longer, and you start to hear it. The shifting hiss of sand beneath the wind, the faint creak of dunes moving grain by grain. And somewhere very far away, a low, rhythmic hum, like someone humming an old song through 1,000 miles of emptiness. That's the desert's heartbeat. And in North Africa, people have always believed that heartbeat carries voices of ancestors, travelers, saints, and spirits who got a little too comfortable on the wrong side of eternity. Here, in Morocco, Algeria, and Tunisia, the line between folklore and faith blurs like heat on the horizon. Every oasis has its own stories, every caravan route its own rumors. Ask anyone who's crossed the sands, and they'll tell you. The desert keeps company. The Berber nomads call them afarit, desert spirits that shimmer in the distance, luring wanderers astray with lights that dance just out of reach. They're not necessarily evil, just mischievous. They whisper your name in the wind, sound like your friend calling for help, and when you turn, no one's there. Just the ripple of air and the long sigh of the dunes. In ancient times, caravans used to travel by starlight, each camel bell marking time like a heartbeat. The merchants told stories to keep themselves awake, tales of jinns made of smokeless fire, born before humanity, free to slip between the worlds. Some were wise, some were wild, and some just liked to rearrange your belongings while you slept. The Quran itself mentions the jinn, and North Africans never doubted their existence. They weren't monsters, they were neighbors. You left a little food out at night, avoided whistling after dark, and never, ever bragged about traveling alone. The desert didn't like pride. It liked humility and small talk with unseen company. Imagine the scene. A campfire flickers beside a cluster of sleeping camels. The stars above are impossibly bright, sharp as salt. The men sit close to the flames, their faces glowing red, their shadows long and thin on the sand. One tells a story. Once, a traveler met a woman made of dust. She offered him water from an empty jug, and when he thanked her, she vanished. The next morning, his path was marked by her footprints, leading straight to an oasis. The others nod. They've heard this one before. Every traveler has. Because in the desert, hospitality is sacred, even among ghosts. By day, the Sahara feels endless. By night, it feels intimate, as if the whole sky has lowered itself just to listen. That's when the marabouts, holy men and mystics, rise to pray. Their shrines, scattered across North Africa, glow faintly under the moon. Small, white domes dot the landscape like seashells washed ashore. Inside, candles burn beside offerings of bread, oil, and salt. People visit them not only to pray, but to speak, to the saints, to their ancestors, to anyone on the other side who's still picking up calls. It's said that when a marabout dies, his spirit stays close, protecting the land around his tomb. Farmers leave water jars at the gates. Nomads stop to light a candle before moving on. And when the wind howls across the sand, people smile and say, "He's still awake." That's the thing about the Sahara. It looks empty, but it's crowded with memory. There are places where caravans vanished centuries ago, their paths now buried under shifting dunes. Sometimes, on still nights, people claim to hear them again. The faint jingle of bells, the creak of leather, the murmur of forgotten prayers. They say the desert never loses track of its travelers. It just keeps them close. In Tunisia, old grandmothers still tell stories of the Rue. Wandering souls who drift across the plains looking for home. You can feel them in sudden gusts of warm wind, or see them in the shimmer of distant heat that looks too alive to be air. When that happens, you're supposed to whisper, "Rahma," mercy, so the spirit knows you mean no harm. It's good manners, really. And then there are the markets. Even the living make room for the unseen there. In Marrakesh or Fez, shopkeepers will sprinkle salt on the floor before opening their stalls. They'll pour a few drops of mint tea into the dust, a small gesture to keep the jinn satisfied. It's not superstition, it's customer service, extended to both sides of the veil. Halloween, with its costumes and candy, would feel strange here, too noisy, too literal. But in a way, every night in the desert is Halloween. It's a place where the past never quite leaves, and the future moves slowly enough for ghosts to keep up. When dawn finally comes, the dunes glow pink and gold, like embers cooling after a long fire. The wind dies down. The silence returns, that perfect, infinite hush that sounds almost like peace. You can't tell if the voices were real or just imagination. But then a grain of sand brushes your cheek, as soft as a fingertip, and for a moment, you could swear the desert just said goodbye. Or maybe hello. Because in North Africa, ghosts don't wander aimlessly. They travel with the caravans, with the winds, with the stories. And if you listen closely, you'll hear them still. A soft, endless whisper, carried on the breath of the Sahara. The desert at night has a particular kind of silence, the kind that listens back. It's not emptiness exactly, it's attention. The Arabs who crossed these sands centuries ago had a word for the strange presence they felt in that stillness. Jinn, creatures of smokeless fire, born before humankind, unseen but always nearby. Not angels, not demons, just neighbors with questionable boundaries. If ghosts are the echoes of people, then jinns are the echoes of creation itself. They're what happens when the universe clears its throat. You can't see them, but sometimes you feel them. The flicker of heat when there's no fire. The whisper of wind when there's no breeze. The sense that someone just left the room, even though no one was ever there. In the old tales, jinns live in abandoned wells, under lonely trees, or in the ruins of cities swallowed by sand. They prefer the edges of things, crossroads, caves, the space between one breath and the next, places that feel slightly unfinished. To travelers, they're both a warning and a comfort, because if a jinn takes interest in you, it means the desert knows your name. The Bedouin tell stories of men who met these spirits under moonlight, a voice calling from nowhere, offering water or directions or a song. Sometimes the traveler returned richer, wiser, or mysteriously married. Sometimes not. Desert hospitality has rules, and the jinn follow their own set. In Morocco, people still talk about Aisha Kandisha, the beautiful spirit who lives in rivers and wells. They say she appears to lonely wanderers, her hair wet, her eyes glowing softly in the dark. She's half human, half legend, entirely inconvenient. Some fear her, some adore her, and some, predictably, have written songs about her. You'll hear her name in Gnawa music. That deep, hypnotic rhythm born from a blend of sub-Saharan drums and Sufi prayer. The musicians play long, looping melodies on metal castanets and bass lutes called gwembri, the sound pulsing like a heartbeat wrapped in smoke. The songs are offerings to the jinn, part invocation, part conversation. Each rhythm calls a different spirit, coaxing them into the dance. It's not haunting, it's harmony. Imagine a small courtyard in Marrakech on a warm night. The air smells of mint tea and dust. Candles flicker in blue glass cups. The music begins, slow, steady, endless. The rhythm builds, people sway, eyes half closed. Somewhere between trance and prayer, the boundary softens. A gust of wind passes through. The musicians smile. They know who's arrived. Because when the drums start, the jinns listen. They may not show themselves, that's not their way, but they answer with movement. A door creaks, a candle flares, a chill sweeps through the crowd. The music continues, respectful, patient. It's an agreement as old as sand. Even Islam, which forbade worship of spirits, couldn't erase the jinn. They simply became part of the landscape, recognized, managed, occasionally blamed for minor inconveniences. Lost your keys. A jinn borrowed them. Heard footsteps behind you. Probably a jinn checking your posture. Woke up grumpy. Definitely a jinn sitting on your chest. They're woven into daily life like wind into the dunes. You might not see them, but you plan around them. Farmers still say Bismillah, in the name of God, before pouring out hot water, just in case a jinn is napping nearby. Children are told not to play at dusk, when the spirits stretch after long naps. And in old houses, the first room on the right is left empty, a guest room for visitors you can't see. It's easy to laugh until you spend a night in the desert yourself. When the moon sinks low and the stars hang close enough to touch, you begin to feel that same awareness, that soft, invisible company. The dunes move like breathing things. The air carries faint music, though you can't tell from where. You look around, nothing, just the sound of sand brushing against sand. And maybe that's all the jinn ever were, the personification of that eerie beauty, that feeling that the world is bigger, stranger, and far more awake than you thought. In cities now, Casablanca, Algiers, Cairo, people still tell jinn stories over coffee. The details change, but the tone remains affectionate, like gossip about eccentric relatives. Someone swears they saw a shadow turn a corner with no body attached. Someone else heard their grandmother's voice calling their name long after she passed. Everyone nods, unconcerned. The jinns are still around. Halloween, with its ghouls and goblins, feels almost clumsy by comparison. Here, the supernatural isn't seasonal. It's simply part of the climate, like dust or music or faith. When dawn rises over the dunes, the wind finally rests. The air grows still, golden, forgiving. The jinns, people say, retreat then, curling back into their invisible homes until the next cool night calls them out. You can feel their absence, like the silence after a song. But if you happen to look back at the horizon as you leave, and the sand ripples in a shape that looks suspiciously like a wave, don't panic, just nod. Because in this land, good manners extend to everyone, even those made of smoke and wind. On a small island off the coast of Africa, the air smells of sea salt and sugarcane. The wind carries both laughter and song. And if you happen to wander through the countryside during the dry season, you might stumble upon something that feels halfway between a family reunion and a resurrection. It's called Famadihana, the turning of the bones. Once every few years, families across Madagascar gather to open the tombs of their ancestors, not with fear or sorrow, but with joy, the kind that hums deep in the chest and spills into dance. It's not a funeral, it's an invitation. The dead have been sleeping long enough. It's time to stretch their legs. At dawn, people arrive dressed in their brightest lamba cloths, pinks, oranges, deep reds that seem to borrow their glow from the sun itself. The tombs are opened carefully, reverently. Inside, wrapped in fine silk shrouds, rest the ancestors, mothers, fathers, great-grandparents, the entire lineage folded neatly into the earth. Each bundle is lifted gently, carried out into the light, and laid across woven mats. Then the music begins. Drums, flutes, and accordions. Voices rise in rhythm, singing songs so old no one remembers who wrote them. And the people dance, circling the tombs, laughing, clapping, spinning, the dust rising around their feet in small golden clouds. Someone pours rum. Someone else uncorks a bottle of soda for the children. It's hot, loud, and entirely alive. The ancestors, still wrapped in their silk, are lifted high and carried above the crowd. Family members dance with them, arms trembling but proud, singing their names, their achievements, their favorite jokes. The shrouds flutter like flags. The living and the dead move together in one shimmering line of color. It sounds strange to outsiders, maybe even unsettling. But here, death has never been a wall. It's a door that swings open when the music starts. Every movement in the Famadihana is filled with meaning. The silk wrappings are replaced with new ones, gifts for the journey beyond. The old cloths are shared among the living, believed to bring blessings and protection. Children are told stories about the people whose names they carry, while elders whisper prayers of thanks for another season of good harvests, good health, and good ghosts. Because make no mistake, the ancestors are very much present. When a breeze passes through the crowd, everyone pauses. Someone murmurs, "They're happy." When a cloud covers the sun, someone else laughs softly. "They're teasing us again." To the Malagasy people, ancestors aren't abstract spirits floating somewhere far away. They're family. They watch, they guide, they occasionally interfere, the way all family members do. One old man once described it perfectly. The dead are just the older part of the village. It's easy to see why Famadihana has been called one of the most joyful celebrations of death in the world. There are no tears, only rhythm. No gravestones, only stories. And as the day goes on, the distinction between living and dead becomes almost irrelevant. At some point, someone always starts a conga line. Yes, really. It winds its way between the tombs, laughter echoing off the stone. Teenagers take selfies. Grandmothers clap along. A few elders sit back sipping rum, nodding to the beat, perhaps imagining their own turn years from now, when they'll join the dance from the other side. When the sun begins to sink, the air cools. The ancestors are carried back into their tombs, their new wrappings gleaming in the last light. Families lay them down gently, whispering thanks. The tombs are sealed once more, the stone pressed tight, but not too tight, because in a few years, they'll be opened again. By nightfall, the music fades to a hum. Children doze off against their parents' legs. The stars appear, bright and unblinking, like a crowd of quiet spectators. And in the hush that follows, the elders light a final candle beside the tomb. Its flame flickers in the sea breeze, steady, golden, defiant. It's a reminder that in Madagascar, death is not darkness, it's continuity. It's a rhythm that never stops, only slows, waiting for the next verse. If Halloween is about ghosts that frighten, Famadihana is about ghosts that embrace. No jump scares, no cold hands from the grave, just the warmth of family, shared across centuries, carried by music. Somewhere deep in the night, the last drumbeat echoes across the hills. The candle sputters, steadies, then finally burns low. But the song, the one that started long before anyone here was born, keeps playing quietly in the wind, because here, on this island of souls, no one really dies. They just learn a few new dance steps. By the time the sun sets over Madagascar, the heat loosens its grip, and a slow amber glow rolls across the hills. The dust settles, the drums grow quiet, but the feeling, that electric hum between the living and the dead, lingers in the air like perfume. Somewhere, a grandmother is still humming an old funeral song, though no one calls it that anymore. It's too full of rhythm, too full of love. It's a song for both worlds. The Famadihana may be over for the day, but its heartbeat continues. Even now, long after the tombs have been sealed, people still feel the ancestors close. They say you can hear them in the wind, not crying, not haunting, just sighing contentedly, like a host after a good party. Because that's what this was, a reunion. A family gathering that just happens to involve both oxygen and eternity. The idea of dancing with the dead sounds like something from a Gothic novel, but here It's the most natural thing in the world. In Madagascar, life and death aren't opposites. They're partners. One moves to the rhythm of the other. When the music starts, people don't ask if the ancestors are watching. They assume they're participating, right there in the circle, invisible but undeniable. Every spin, every clap, every stomp of bare feet on warm earth is an act of remembrance, a declaration that love doesn't vanish when breath does. The elders say that the first Famadihana began with a dream. A man dreamt of his father asking to see the sky again. So he opened the tomb, carried his father's bones into the sunlight, and wrapped them in fresh silk. When the family danced, they said the wind changed, softer, lighter, sweeter. They took it as a sign that joy could travel both ways. Ever since, the dance has been about balance between reverence and laughter, grief and gratitude. It's impossible to stand in the middle of that crowd, music swirling like smoke, and not feel something ancient stirring in your chest. Even the skeptics, even the teenagers who roll their eyes at the old stories, end up smiling, moving, forgetting themselves, because somewhere in that rhythm, you recognize it, the pulse that all human hearts share, the need to connect, to remember, to belong. At night, when the festivities fade and the stars return, families gather by small fires outside their homes. Someone brews coffee, thick, dark, sweetened with honey. Someone else tells stories of ancestors who once tamed crocodiles, who farmed impossible fields, who walked for days to find love or forgiveness. The children listen wide-eyed. The adults nod, adding new names to the story as the flames flicker. And when the fire burns low, the eldest person in the group always says the same thing. They are here. No one argues. No one asks for proof. They all just sit a little closer, as though making room for invisible guests. It's a beautiful thought that the people you've lost never really go away. They change address maybe. They get quieter. But every so often, when the night feels too heavy, they send a breeze or a melody to remind you they're still invested in your story. In the West, death is often treated like an intruder, something to avoid, disguise, or fight. But in Madagascar, it's an old friend who shows up for dinner unannounced, and everyone just scoots over to make space. There's no fear in it, only familiarity. Maybe that's why there's so much laughter during Famadihana. Not nervous laughter, but the kind that comes from release, from realizing that the worst thing that can happen already happened, and somehow everyone's still together. One elder once explained it simply. When we dance, the dead rest better. When we forget them, they get restless. It's not superstition. It's a kind of emotional maintenance, like watering a garden that happens to grow on both sides of time. The more you think about it, the more you realize how humane it is. This refusal to separate life from death, joy from grief. It's a reminder that memory isn't a burden, it's a bridge. So when people say dancing with the dead, they don't mean it as a metaphor. They mean it literally. They mean feeling your grandmother's rhythm in your own hips, your great-grandfather's laughter in the back of your throat. They mean the moment you forget where your body ends and their story begins. And when the song finally ends, when the drums stop and the dust settles and the last candle sputters, everyone sits quietly for a moment, catching their breath. No applause, no goodbyes, just silence. Because silence here isn't absence, it's completion. The stars shine brighter than they did before. The wind carries the faint echo of a drumbeat, soft, steady, eternal. And somewhere beneath the earth, The ancestors smile, wrapped once more in their silk, their bones still warm from the dance. Tomorrow, life will continue. Children will run, lovers will argue, rain will fall. But tonight, for a few perfect hours, the distance between worlds disappeared. And that's enough. Because in Madagascar, no one really dances for the dead. They dance with them. And that small difference changes everything. At night, the sea around Africa glows. Not always visibly, though sometimes it does, when plankton shimmer blue beneath the waves. But you can feel it. A pulse. A rhythm that hums through the shore, steady and endless, like a heartbeat older than anything living. For those who live by the coast, the ocean isn't just water. It's a boundary and a bridge. It swallows, but it also returns. It listens. Across the continent, from Senegal to Zanzibar, people have always spoken to the sea. They pour offerings into the waves, palm wine, coins, flowers, even perfume. Small gestures meant for the spirits who dwell beneath the surface. To most outsiders, it looks like ritual. To those who know, it's just good manners. Because everyone here understands something simple. The sea keeps secrets, and occasionally it gives them back. In West Africa, fishermen tell stories of Mamiwata, the water spirit who rules the deep. She's part woman, part fish, all mystery. Her hair flows like dark seaweed. Her laughter echoes like waves over coral. And she's said to appear to sailors in moments of calm. Just before the storm, if you please her, she blesses you with wealth and safety. If you offend her, well, you'll have a very long swim home. There are shrines to Mamiwata all along the Atlantic, painted in blues and silvers, decorated with mirrors, seashells and perfume bottles. Worshippers leave offerings not of fear, but of beauty. Because if there's one thing Mamiwata loves, it's elegance. She's not a monster. She's a queen with expensive taste. Her followers, mostly women, though not always, describe her as both nurturing and demanding. She brings healing, inspiration, and sometimes chaos. A reminder that even divinity can be moody. In Nigeria and Ghana, Mamiwata ceremonies still happen today. Drums beating like surf, dancers spinning with shimmering cloth that catches the light like fish scales. The music rises, the air thickens, and somewhere in the crowd, someone begins to sway, slowly, deliberately, as if being moved by an unseen tide. Possession, they call it. But it's not frightening. It's communion. The spirit stepping ashore for a moment, borrowing a body to join the celebration. Further south, in Mozambique and along the Swahili coast, the ocean carries different names but the same reverence. Here, fishermen pour the first drops of their catch's blood into the sea as an offering. Thank you, they say. We'll be back tomorrow. It's a small contract between humanity and the horizon. When storms hit, people light candles near the shore. They call out to the ancestors who drowned, the sailors lost to trade winds, the slaves taken across the water centuries ago. Each candle flickers in the salt wind, defiant and soft. A reminder that not everyone who left the shore left willingly. In those moments, the sea becomes more than geography. It becomes memory itself. It holds the songs of those who were taken and the prayers of those who remain. It hums with unfinished journeys. There's an old legend told among the coastal Yoruba people of a fisherman who dreamed of his lost brother. In the dream, the brother stood waist-deep in water, smiling. "Why haven't you visited?" he asked. "I didn't know where you were," the fisherman replied. His brother laughed and said, "You always knew. You just didn't look far enough." The next morning, the fisherman walked to the shore, poured wine into the waves, and whispered his brother's name. He swore he felt the tide pull softly toward him, like an embrace. It's stories like this that give the ocean its dual nature: gentle and unforgiving, sacred and mischievous. It swallows the careless and protects the wise. It punishes arrogance and rewards humility. It demands to be respected, the way all ancient things do. Even now, under modern lights and harbors filled with ships, the old rituals survive. On New Year's Eve in coastal Angola, people throw white flowers into the surf, asking the ocean to wash away bad luck. In Zanzibar, fishermen still whisper prayers before casting nets, calling the sea Mama Bahari, Mother Ocean. And in Senegal, surfers and sailors alike greet the first wave with a touch of the hand to the heart. Because whether you're a priest or a tourist, there's something about that vast blue immensity that humbles you. It looks like freedom but feels like judgment. It's beautiful because it doesn't need you. The sea connects Africa to the rest of the world, but it also connects Africa to itself. The same tide that brushes the shores of Morocco touches Ghana, Angola, and Cape Town. The same moon that pulls the waves here pulls the waves of memory everywhere else. And maybe that's why so many coastal peoples believe that the ocean is the afterlife's main road, the one that leads both directions. When the tide recedes and the night grows quiet, the beach belongs to no one. Footprints vanish, the air cools, the waves whisper, steady and kind. Somewhere far offshore, lightning flashes silently, too distant to threaten. And for a moment, the horizon blurs. You can't tell where sea ends and sky begins. That's the trick of it, the lesson the ocean has always taught. The line between worlds is only real until the water moves. So if you ever stand by an African shore and feel a sudden gust that smells of salt and something older, don't be afraid. It's not a ghost. It's the sea, checking in. And if you're polite, you'll whisper back, "Asante, Mama. Thank you for the tide." If West Africa had a philosophy of eternity, it would sound something like this. No one really dies. They just change their name. Among the Yoruba people of Nigeria, Benin, and Togo, death isn't a departure. It's a rotation, a relay race between generations, with the ancestors passing the baton to the living, who will one day pass it right back. It's not grim, it's efficient. The Yoruba call this eternal pattern atunwa, the return. Souls, they say, come and go through the great marketplace of existence, always shopping for another chance to learn, to love, to get it right this time. You don't leave the world, you simply take the next shift. Every newborn child arrives with a question hanging over them. Who have you been before? The elders look closely, searching the baby's face for familiar traits, familiar habits. A laugh that sounds like a grandmother's, a birthmark shaped like an old scar, a stubbornness that feels suspiciously ancestral. It's never coincidence, it's continuity. Sometimes a baby will be named Babatunde. Father has returned, or Yetunde. Mother has come again. It's not just sentiment, it's a statement of fact. The family tree isn't growing, it's looping. And that looping worldview changes everything. When you believe you'll be back, you live differently. You care for the land as if it's rented from yourself. You raise your children knowing they might raise you one day. You fear less because you've already survived everything once before. In Yoruba belief, the universe is layered, not stacked like a ladder, but woven like fabric. The physical world, Aye, and the spiritual world, Adarun, overlap constantly, separated only by attention. When you pray, sing, or dream, you tug the threads together for a moment. That's when the ancestors step through. They're called Egungun, the spirits of those who came before, clothed in wind and memory. You've met them already in the masquerades of earlier chapters, those whirling figures of colour and sound. But here, in Yoruba thought, they're not just performers, they're proof. Proof that the dead don't fade, they just become louder. When someone dies, the family doesn't say they've gone away. They say, he has travelled. And everyone knows that someday, maybe even soon, he'll return by another road. Funerals here aren't sad endings, they're grand send-offs. Drums echo, songs rise. Women wear aso ebi, coordinated cloth, bright as festival flags. The deceased is praised like a traveller about to embark on an adventure. No matter how far you go, they sing, home will still find you. And home, in Yoruba cosmology, isn't a place. It's a rhythm, the constant give and take between Aye and Malrun. That rhythm has its own music, the talking drum, whose tone can mimic speech. During rituals, drummers speak directly to the ancestors, sending messages that only the dead fully understand. It's like the original form of text messaging, except the replies come through wind, luck, or coincidence. Even the deities, the Orisa, live in that in-between space. They're not distant gods perched on clouds. They're cosmic administrators of everyday life. Oya rules the wind and change. Yemoja guards the ocean and motherhood. Osun governs love, beauty, and rivers, and is said to carry messages between lovers and spirits alike. It's a vast, poetic system, a universe run less by rules and more by relationships. And at its heart sits one idea that might be the most comforting in the world. You don't need to fear judgment if your ancestors are on the jury. That doesn't mean you can do whatever you want. Every action, every kindness, every cruelty ripples through the generations. If you harm someone, you might meet them again in the next round. If you heal, that healing will come back to you too. It's cosmic accountability, softened by love. In this worldview, even Halloween would seem redundant. Why set aside one night to remember the dead when they're already part of every sunrise? In Yoruba homes, you might find a small altar, a shelf with candles, kola nuts, cowrie shells, and perhaps a carved figure. This isn't decoration, it's communication. The ancestors are there, listening between sips of palm wine and the faint static of eternity. Before big decisions, marriages, journeys, new jobs, people still whisper prayers to them. Sometimes the ancestors answer through dreams, sometimes through intuition, and sometimes through a coincidence so precise it feels like a wink from the universe. One Yoruba proverb says, "The world is a marketplace, heaven is home." It means life is busy, noisy, unpredictable, but death is just the quiet walk back home after a long day of trading. Maybe that's why Yoruba funerals end not with weeping, but with drumming. As the last rhythm fades into the night, people smile, because they know the traveller has merely changed form, and that soon, somewhere nearby, a baby will be born who laughs just the same. So if you ever find yourself in Lagos or Ife during one of these ceremonies, and the music makes your chest vibrate, don't resist it. That's not just percussion, that's eternity keeping time. And if the breeze happens to brush your cheek right as the drummers stop, don't be startled. Someone's just saying, "See you soon." Ghana's nights are soft. Even in the cities, the darkness settles gently, folding around houses like a blanket that remembers every dream. And in the villages, far from traffic and neon, the only light comes from fires, or, on certain nights, from hundreds of candles glowing in doorways like patient stars. This is the festival of the dead. But unlike the loud masquerades of Nigeria or the dancing bones of Madagascar, Ghana's remembrance is quieter, a ceremony of stillness and small gestures. It begins with light. As dusk approaches, families step outside with candles or oil lamps. They place them on the ground by their doors, on walls, or in the crook of an old tree. Each one is meant for someone: a mother, a brother, a friend, a name that still feels warm on the tongue. The flames shiver in the evening breeze. Children watch them carefully, as if waiting for the dead to appear. But no one expects ghosts. The light itself is the presence. In Akan belief, death isn't disappearance, it's transition. The soul, the Kara, returns to its creator, while the spirit, the Sunsum, lingers, watching over the family like a gentle echo. If the living live well, the spirits are pleased. If the living quarrel, forget, or act foolishly, the ancestors grow restless. It's an ongoing relationship, like one of those group chats you can't leave. So these lights, these quiet nights, are not about grief. They're about maintenance, keeping the connection warm, the memory tidy, the lineage intact. In the towns along Ghana's coast, the night air smells faintly of salt and charcoal. From nearby kitchens comes the sizzle of tilapia frying, the soft laughter of neighbors sharing food. It's not somber, it's intimate. The living feed the dead the same way they feed each other, with generosity and a touch of spice. Somewhere in a courtyard, a grandmother sits by her candle, whispering names into the flame. The fire flickers, the wax drips, and she smiles. Still listening, she murmurs. And maybe they are. In the northern regions, the tradition takes on a slightly different tone. There, families often visit ancestral shrines, simple clay structures topped with feathers or carved figures. They bring millet beer and pour it slowly over the ground, a small amount for the ancestors, the rest to share among the living. The beer foams, the earth drinks, and the night hums with satisfaction. If you ask an elder why they do this, they might say, because gratitude needs practice. And that's really what these nights are, practice. For gratitude, for patience, for the gentle art of remembering without sadness. Even modern Ghanaians, busy with city life, hold on to parts of it. In Accra, power outages are common, and when they happen, people light candles. Some light them purely for practicality, others quietly, for memory. It's a strange coincidence that the power cuts and the old rituals look exactly the same, as if the ancestors occasionally unplugged the lights just to remind everyone who invented the idea first. Ghana's funerals are famously grand, full of colour and drumming and coffins carved like cars or fish or mobile phones. But the Festival of the Dead is the opposite. Humble, still, nearly silent. It's a moment when noise yields to listening, when everyone, living or gone, takes a collective breath. Sometimes, though, the silence breaks. Somewhere, a child giggles, a goat bleats. The wind rustles through plantain leaves, carrying the faint sound of waves from the coast. And for a second, you could swear the breeze itself smells like the person you've lost. Palm oil, soap, the faint musk of life. In Akan homes, elders often tell children that their ancestors live in the wind. When the air moves, it's them visiting, they say. So don't close your windows too quickly. That's why, on these nights, houses stay open. Doors ajar, curtains fluttering. A welcome sign for those who travel without feet. When midnight comes, the candles burn low. Some families whisper prayers before snuffing them out. Others let them die naturally. Either way, the darkness that follows isn't frightening. It's soft, like the closing of eyes before sleep. If you stand outside then, you'll notice something remarkable. The world feels lighter, not empty, but balanced, as if the unseen guests have taken what they needed and left a blessing behind. And maybe they have. In the morning, the streets look the same. Chickens scratching, children chasing tires, radio stations arguing about football. Life resumes, louder and messier. But if you look closely, you might still spot a stub of melted wax on a wall, a tiny black mark from a candle flame. A small proof that someone remembered to remember. Because in Ghana, memory isn't an act of mourning. It's a form of housekeeping. You keep it clean, you keep it alive, and every so often, you air it out under the stars. And when the wind sighs through the trees at night, gentle and familiar, everyone knows exactly what it means. The ancestors are pleased, so the living smile, stretch and whisper to the air, Medes, thank you. And the wind, warm and kind, answers back without words. When Halloween finally wandered into Africa, it didn't arrive with thunder or broomsticks. It came quietly, on a cargo ship maybe, or in the luggage of a British teacher with too many paper skeletons. At first, nobody knew what to do with it. Because really, what do you give a continent that already has 4,000 years of ghost stories and an entire department dedicated to talking with the dead? The first sightings were in the cities, Cape Town, Lagos, Nairobi. Supermarkets began selling plastic pumpkins that smelled faintly of shipping containers. Someone hung a Happy Halloween banner above a shop that also sold cassava flour and goat feed. It was all very confusing. Children were told they could dress up as monsters and ask strangers for candy. Parents, understandably, asked, why? The explanation, because it's fun, didn't quite hold up against centuries of practical parenting. Fun, yes, but what does it do? What spirit does it appease? What ancestor does it honor? When nobody could answer, the mothers shrugged and said, fine, as long as you're home before dark. And so, the first African Halloween parties were a bit experimental. Costumes were improvised, witches in flip-flops, zombies in football jerseys, vampires wearing school ties. Pumpkins were rare, so people carved watermelons instead. They glowed beautifully, though the mosquitoes loved them even more than the children did. In Ghana, a radio host tried to explain Halloween to his audience. It's a day when people celebrate ghosts, he said. There was a pause. Then an old caller phoned in and asked, but we already do that every day. Fair point. Africa didn't reject Halloween. It just didn't need it. Because here, death isn't taboo. It's a house guest. You feed it, sing to it, occasionally dance with it. The idea of needing a special day for spirits felt almost redundant. Still, the holiday found its niche among the young and curious. In Nairobi, students turned it into costume festivals with DJ sets and glow sticks. In Johannesburg, it became an excuse for elaborate house parties. Witches drinking wine out of calabashes, skeletons complaining about rent. In Lagos, it blended effortlessly with existing traditions of street masquerades. Except now, the masks had LED lights. Africa didn't copy Halloween, it remixed it. The continent has always been good at that, taking imported things, turning them around, and sending them back better. Jazz, for instance, or mobile banking, or, in this case, the concept of the afterlife itself. Because while the West has its vampires and ghosts, Africa's spirits have jobs. They manage crops, protect homes, settle disputes, even forecast weather. They don't lurk, they lead. Which makes Western ghosts, frankly, look a bit lazy. When Halloween entered this ecosystem, it was politely absorbed. Some churches held Hallelujah nights as an alternative, with gospel music instead of ghost stories. Some schools hosted cultural costume days, where kids dressed as ancestral heroes instead of movie monsters. And in one Tanzanian town, people simply renamed it Pumpkin Evening, a festival about food and friendship. No spirits required. Meanwhile, social media did its part. Every October, Instagram fills with Africans posting pictures of themselves in creative costumes, a witch with braids and sunglasses, a zombie bride eating jollof rice, a pharaoh scrolling on his phone. The captions are half joke, half philosophy. Our ancestors walked so we could slay. Even the brands joined in. Telecom companies released Halloween ads that somehow involved data bundles. Supermarkets sold spooky yams. One billboard in Accra featured a ghost saying, "Our network never dies." If the ancestors saw all this, they probably just smiled, because from their perspective, this was nothing new. Just another way for the living to play dress-up before bedtime. But the funny thing is, Halloween did end up finding a place, not as a rival to traditional festivals, but as an echo. A reminder, perhaps, that the rest of the world was finally catching up to what Africa already knew. That death is not darkness, but continuity wrapped in mystery and laughter. There's something poetic about a child in Nairobi wearing a Dracula cape, knocking on doors under a sky filled with ancestors. They're separated by time, culture, and costume, but united by curiosity. That same urge to look into the dark and ask, who's there? And somewhere, deep in the unseen world, a grandmother probably answers, "It's just us, dear, always has been." By the end of the night, the costumes come off. The children fall asleep sticky with sugar. The city lights dim, and above it all, the same African moon that has watched over every harvest, every fire, every ritual for millennia glows quietly. Maybe, just maybe, it's smiling. Because whether it's pumpkins or ancestors, songs or candy, the point is the same. To remember that we are not alone, that even in the dark, the world is still full of company. So yes, Halloween came to Africa, and Africa said, "Welcome, but we've been expecting you." There are cities that sleep, and there are cities that hum through the night, like an electrical current. Nairobi hums. Long after the sun drops behind the Ngong Hills, the air fills with the blended music of car horns, crickets, and the faint bass of someone's Bluetooth speaker 2 streets away. It's a city that never seems entirely awake or entirely dreaming, which might explain why the dead feel so at home here. Modern Nairobi has discovered its own version of Halloween. It's less about fear and more about fun. A mashup of masquerade, music, and just the right amount of mischief. The kind of night where you might find a skeleton ordering a cocktail, a mummy dancing to Afro beats, and someone dressed as a vampire trying to negotiate for chapati at a food stall. No one is scared. Everyone's just vibing. It started small. A few expats throwing costume parties, a handful of bars trying out spooky themes. But Nairobi, being Nairobi, couldn't resist adding rhythm. The DJs replaced eerie organ music with amapiano beats. The fog machines mixed with the smell of nyama choma, grilled meat sizzling under the stars. And before long, Halloween became less about horror and more about heat. Somewhere in Westlands, at one of the city's rooftop lounges, a party called Fright and Delight kicks off every October. There are LED pumpkins, glowing skulls, and a bar menu featuring cocktails named the Witch Doctor and Spirit of the Savannah. People arrive in costumes that range from elaborate to improvised. One man shows up in a full pharaoh outfit. Another just sticks 2 paper fangs to his teeth and calls it minimalism. The music starts and the city moves. For hours people dance, not to forget their troubles, but to shake them loose. And every now and then the wind picks up just enough to make someone's candle flicker, and someone always jokes, "Ah, the ancestors have entered the chat." It's funny, but also a little true. Because in Kenya, even modern celebrations are never entirely divorced from the spiritual world. Behind every joke, every drumbeat, every toast, there's a quiet layer of reverence. You'll still find families lighting candles for their departed, pouring the first sip of beer onto the ground before drinking, saying softly, "Kwa wafu wetu," for our dead. The boundary between nightclub and night ritual is thinner than anyone admits, and maybe that's the secret. Nairobi's Halloween isn't an imported festival anymore. It's an evolution. A way for the city to express something it's always known, that the night is alive, and we share it. Downtown, in the older neighborhoods, the celebrations take a different form. Churches hold All Saints vigils, where candles burn from dusk till dawn, prayers mingling with soft hymns that echo through narrow streets. Across town, university students host costume raves under strobe lights. Somewhere in between, a grandmother opens her window to let the night breeze in, murmuring a blessing that probably covers both crowds equally. Even the spirits, if they're watching, must be entertained. Imagine them hovering above Uhuru Park, watching thousands of glowing phone screens and thinking, "Ah, so this is what candles look like now." The truth is, Nairobi has always had ghosts, not scary ones, but historical ones. The colonial buildings downtown whisper with the memories of old bureaucrats and clerks. The markets bustle with the voices of traders long gone. The matatus, those gloriously chaotic minibuses with neon lights and gospel bass, still play songs that were written by musicians who've already joined the ancestors. In this city, the living and the dead commute together. Every so often, someone will tell you a story about a boda boda motorbike taxi that carried a passenger who vanished halfway to their stop, about a night watchman who sees a woman in white walking through the park, not dangerous, just thoughtful, as if looking for her old route home. And somehow, these stories aren't told to frighten anyone. They're told the way people share neighborhood gossip. The dead, after all, are still part of the neighborhood. What makes Nairobi's new Halloween so special is that it's not pretending. It's not trying to mimic America or Europe. It's simply being itself, curious, chaotic, a little sacred, and a little silly. A festival that says, yes, we have ghosts, but they dance better than yours. By the time dawn creeps in, the clubs begin to empty. Street vendors set up tea stalls, the smell of chai and ginger filling the morning air. Some partygoers head to church, others head to bed. Either way, the night has done its work. It's reminded everyone, living or otherwise, that joy is the best kind of haunting. Somewhere in the city, a candle forgotten on a balcony still burns. Its tiny flame bends with the wind, holding steady as the sky turns pink. Below it, the streets hum again. Matatus blaring, markets opening, life resuming its usual tempo. And above it all, Nairobi's unseen audience, the ancestors, the dreamers, the souls still curious about this noisy neon world, smile quietly and fade back into the air. Because in Nairobi, when the night ends, the dead don't disappear. They just wait for the next beat. If you could measure chaos in decibels, Lagos would be visible from space. It's a city of 10 million voices, 3 million car horns, and one collective heartbeat that refuses to rest. By day, it's commerce. By night, it's confession. And somewhere in between, the ancestors sneak in to see what all the noise is about. Because in Lagos, no one, not even the dead, sleeps through the night. The city doesn't have seasons. It has moods. Rain or shine, traffic or blackout. Lagos moves like a river that forgot it's supposed to stop. The streets flash with neon lights and gospel billboards. Mosques echo with the dawn call. And from every club, a low bass line pulses like the planet's heartbeat turned up too loud. It's hard to imagine a place further from the quiet candlelit rituals of the countryside. And yet, even here, among the skyscrapers and street vendors, the old spirits haven't gone anywhere. They've just adapted to the Wi-Fi. Modern Lagos celebrates Halloween in its own way, as a glamorous hybrid of costume, comedy, and cultural remix. There's a party called Haunted Island on Victoria Island, where DJs play until sunrise and everyone looks far too good to be truly scary. There's Afrobeat's Afterlife in Lekki, a rooftop rave where dancers wear glowing masks that shimmer in sync with the music. And somewhere between them, an elderly woman selling suya, spicy grilled meat, on the corner still begins every sale with a quiet prayer to her ancestors. That's Lagos in one sentence. The sacred and the ridiculous, sharing the same dance floor. If Halloween in the West is about pretending to be something else, Lagos Halloween is about exaggerating what you already are. Witches wear high heels. Zombies carry smartphones. One man, even dressed as Nigerian traffic, wrapped himself in yellow tape and shouted at people for stopping too long. He won first prize. The parties are loud, bright, and very self-aware. There's something both funny and profound about seeing hundreds of people dancing to a song called Who Dey Bray while wearing skeleton makeup. It's campy, chaotic, deeply human, and in its own way, spiritual. Because Lagos, despite all its modern swagger, is built on layers of spirit. Beneath the asphalt lies ancient sand, once walked by fishermen who whispered to the tides before casting their nets. In the markets, women selling herbs and charms still recite incantations to Oya, goddess of the wind, asking her to blow away bad business. Taxi drivers hang small amulets from their mirrors, part air freshener, part protection. And when lightning splits the night sky over the lagoon, everyone knows Shango, god of thunder, is reminding the city who invented electricity first. Even in death, Lagosians don't slow down. Funerals here are as lively as concerts, marching bands, sequined coffins, entire streets shut down so the deceased can exit life the way they lived it, dramatically. It's not uncommon for mourners to hire dancers, brass players, even hype men to accompany the procession. If the ancestors are watching, they're taking notes. You can see that same spirit in the city's nightlife, where the line between the living and the legendary blurs like neon reflected in rainwater. A DJ scratches vinyl. Someone shouts a prayer over the mic. A dancer collapses into laughter mid-spin. For a heartbeat, the room feels timeless. The same rhythm that once summoned gods now shaking the floor of a rooftop bar. And maybe, if you listen closely enough between the beats, you'll hear it. A faint whisper under the music, the sound of something ancient keeping time. One club owner swears he's felt it. Sometimes, around 3 a.m., he says, the air changes, the speakers buzz, the lights flicker. I think it's just the ancestors showing off their moves. In Lagos, that explanation feels perfectly reasonable, because here the supernatural doesn't compete with the modern world. It collaborates. Ghosts would never ruin a party. they'd RSVP, they'd bring snacks. When dawn comes, the streets fill with their usual symphony. Bus horns, preachers, and roosters arguing about everything. The clubs empty out, their floors sticky with spilled drinks and moonlight. Somewhere, a preacher sets up his morning service with a speaker that somehow still works. Someone else lights a candle on a sidewalk for an auntie gone too soon. Both acts mean the same thing. We remember we're still here. And maybe that's the secret that keeps Lagos alive long after other cities fade. It doesn't separate its worlds. It lets the ancestors dance in the same traffic as the living. By the time the sun rises, the lagoon glows gold, the skyscrapers shimmer, and the city exhales, ready to start the chaos again. Somewhere, a lone drummer taps out a rhythm on a plastic bucket. Slow, steady, ancient. It echoes between buildings up through the humid air into the sky. And you can almost imagine the ancestors smiling, tired but proud, whispering to the living, "You kept the beat." When the missionaries arrived in Africa, they brought many things: books, hymns, pocket, watches, and an unshakable certainty that they understood the afterlife better than anyone else. They came to save souls, but what they found were people who already knew exactly where their souls went. Across the continent, Africans had long believed in the nearness of the dead. Ancestors who watched, advised, and occasionally interfered in human affairs. To the missionaries, that sounded like idolatry. To the Africans, it sounded like Tuesday. "Your ancestors are not gods," the preachers insisted. "No," the elders replied patiently, "they're family." It was a simple misunderstanding, one that would shape centuries. Colonial Christianity worked like a broom. It swept clean, but it also swept away. Rituals were banned, shrines demolished, sacred forests felled to build mission schools. The old languages of prayer, the songs, the drums, the whispers, were called pagan noise. The new faith offered salvation, but it also came with curfews for spirits. And yet, the ghost didn't leave. In Ghana, the same people who went to church on Sunday still poured libations on Monday. In Malawi, families baptized their babies and later buried the umbilical cords beneath ancestral trees. In Congo, mothers prayed to the Virgin Mary with one hand and to their grandmothers with the other. It wasn't rebellion, it was logic. Why abandon a system that had always worked just because someone else had a different translation of eternity? So African Christianity became something unique. A fusion of faiths, part Bible, part drumbeat, part dream. The missionaries preached resurrection, but Africans had already been practicing it for generations. They just called it return. In time, the new churches learned to adapt. They added drums to their hymns, call and response to their liturgies. They sang psalms in rhythms that would have startled King David. And slowly, the space between altar and ancestor narrowed again. Today, you can walk into a church in Nigeria, Kenya, or South Africa and feel it. That quiet vibration of something older humming beneath the hallelujahs. Somewhere between the sermon and the singing, the veil lifts. For a moment, the Holy Spirit and the ancestral spirit share the same doorway. But the colonial era left behind more than religion. It left a haunting of its own. The missionaries feared ghosts, but they created new ones, in history, in architecture, in memory. Old government houses where administrators once ruled are now said to echo with footsteps after dark. Abandoned churches creak like ships stranded on dry land. In these places, the past doesn't rest quietly. It rattles the windows. Maybe that's why African ghost stories are rarely about personal tragedy. They're about history refusing to sit still. The restless souls are not just the dead. They're the unacknowledged, the colonized, the unheard. And they whisper not for revenge, but for remembrance. There's a legend from Kenya about a colonial clerk who mocked local rituals, calling them nonsense. When he died, people claimed his spirit wandered restlessly through the mission compound, muttering prayers in Kikuyu, a language he never learned while alive. The locals laughed softly. He understands now, they said. For all the damage colonialism did, it couldn't kill the African idea of balance, the belief that the seen and unseen must coexist. If you erase one, the other falters. That's why even the most devout modern Christians here still greet their ancestors before big decisions. They'll kneel in church, then pour a few drops of water outside the door, just in case. It's not contradiction, it's context. African Christianity, for all its imported roots, remains grounded in relationship. Heaven is not far away, it's just another neighborhood. And the saints, the angels, the ancestors, they all share the same address. Even the idea of Halloween found an odd home here. Some churches hold All Souls Nights, not to summon ghosts, but to pray for them. Candles burn, choirs sing. People list names aloud, not as superstition, but as gratitude. It's the same ancient impulse, now wearing Sunday clothes. Somewhere in this blend of hymn and heritage, Africa quietly redefined faith itself. It stopped being about who you worship and became about how well you remember. Because memory, not dogma, is what keeps a soul alive. If you stand outside a small church at dusk, you'll see it clearly. The glow of candles through stained glass, the silhouettes of people kneeling, and just beyond the doorway, the shadows of trees swaying like an unseen congregation. And if you listen long enough, you'll hear two songs overlapping. A hymn sung in harmony, and the faint echo of a drum far away. Different languages, same meaning. Both saying the same thing the ancestors have said all along. We're still here. Modern Africa moves fast, so fast that even the ancestors might need better Wi-Fi just to keep up. Cities have grown taller, streets brighter, and old beliefs now live comfortably inside new technologies. But still, on certain nights, you can hear the echo, faint but steady, of something ancient keeping rhythm beneath it all. That rhythm is what keeps Halloween interesting here. It's no longer foreign. It's no longer strange. It's just African now. In some neighborhoods of Nairobi or Accra, children knock on doors with paper masks and recycled candy bags, yelling, "Trick or treat," in accents that shift between English, Swahili, and whatever local language best fits the rhyme. Parents watch from the gates, amused. Elders smile and say, "So they've turned ancestor visits into snacks now." But no one minds, because deep down, everyone recognizes what's happening. The old ritual of visiting, offering, and remembering has simply changed costumes. In Lagos, Halloween has become part street carnival, part costume contest, part unintentional anthropology project. Teenagers dress as superheroes and witches, but they also dress as traditional spirits, Egungun, Mamiwata, Oya, complete with glowing masks and modern soundtracks. It's cosplay meets cosmology. At one Halloween parade in Victoria Island, someone arrived dressed as an ancestor with a smartphone. Every time someone asked for a selfie, he'd hold up the phone and say, "The ancestors are watching, and they just liked your photo." The crowd loved it, because that's the thing about Africa. Even its ghosts have a sense of humor. Social media, of course, has become the new storytelling circle. What used to be tales told around the fire are now viral TikToks about haunted boarding schools, mischievous spirits, or mysterious voices caught on late-night audio. African ghost stories trends at least once a year, and the comment sections are filled with laughter, disbelief, and the occasional, "Hey, don't joke with those things." People still take the unseen seriously, but lightly. They've learned that the best way to live with ghosts is not to fear them, but to follow them on Instagram. Meanwhile, in rural areas, the old traditions continue quietly. Families still pour libations before meals. Elders still light fires for guidance. Children still hear stories about the trickster spider Anansi, who outsmarts death with nothing but wit and bad manners. And every harvest season, people still gather to give thanks, not to the spooky, but to the sacred. In cities, though, Halloween is now an excuse for creativity. Art students turn ancestral myths into costumes made of recycled fabric and LED lights. DJs remix funeral drumming into dance floor anthems. Churches hold candlelight vigils that feel like jazz. And everywhere you go, someone is filming it. What's fascinating is how naturally it all blends. The same person who attends a prayer service at dawn might go to a Halloween rave at night, without feeling they've betrayed either. In Africa, contradictions are just collaborations waiting to happen. Even businesses have caught on. In Ghana, one shopping mall rebranded Halloween as Spirit Week, complete with drumming performances, storytelling corners, and pumpkin-flavored jollof rice, a brave experiment that divided the nation. In Kenya, a brewery released a special beer called Ancestor's Night, its label featuring a cheerful skeleton raising a glass. The tagline, "Brewed for both sides." It's funny, but it's also fitting, because Africa has never been a continent that fears the unseen. It negotiates with it. It leaves room for both the science of the modern world and the magic that built it. If you walk through a neighborhood in Ghana or Uganda on October 31st, you might see two scenes happening at once. At one house, kids in vampire masks run around screaming. At the next, an old woman sits outside whispering prayers for her ancestors, a candle flickering at her feet. And somehow, it all feels perfectly natural. Two sides of the same coin, shining together under the same moon. That's the quiet genius of African culture. It never replaces, it repurposes. What the world calls superstition, Africa calls memory. What others see as contradiction, Africa sees as coexistence. So yes, there are pumpkins now. There are cobwebs made of cotton and DJs dressed as devils. But behind every neon mask and glowing ghost prop lies something older, deeper, truer. The understanding that the living and the dead have always shared the night. When midnight comes, the streets begin to quiet. The laughter fades. The candles gutter. Somewhere, a last song plays. A remix of drums and digital beats. The perfect metaphor for this new age. The ghosts don't mind the noise. They like the music. And as the wind moves gently through the alleys, you can almost imagine the ancestors watching, amused and affectionate. They've seen 1,000 rituals, 1,000 costumes, 1,000 ways for the living to make peace with the mystery of being alive. And if they could speak aloud, maybe they'd say, "Carry on, just remember who taught you how to celebrate the dark." Before electricity, before clocks, before the world decided that night was something to conquer instead of respect, there was the fire. Everywhere in Africa, the day used to end the same way. People gathered around small circles of flame. Wood cracked, sparks rose, and darkness folded neatly around the edges of light. That was the original theatre, the first classroom, the earliest church. Because firelight, unlike sunlight, asks nothing of you. It doesn't expose, it invites. It hums softly and listens. It makes everything, faces, voices, even silence, feel a little more truthful. That's where the stories lived. Long before Halloween, before the missionaries, before the first foreign ships reached these shores, Africans were already telling tales about life, death, and everything between. They didn't call it mythology. They called it evening. There were stories about how the moon borrowed its light from the sun, and how death was once just a messenger who got stuck doing the job forever. There were tricksters who outsmarted gods, and farmers who befriended spirits, and children who turned into stars. And in every story, the living and the dead shared a bench beside the fire. One speaking, one listening, both remembering. That rhythm, a voice, pause, laughter, reflection, is still part of African life. Even in cities full of neon lights and phone screens, the instinct remains. People gather, they share, they listen to the night. Halloween, in its global form, is about the spectacle of fear. But under African firelight, fear becomes curiosity. The ghosts aren't there to scare, they're there to explain. They remind you that the dark is not emptiness, it's a conversation waiting to happen. In the countryside, this tradition continues. When the power cuts, no one panics. Someone simply says, "Good, we can see the stars again." Then the stories begin. The elders speak, their voices low and steady, and the children lean in. Not because they have to, but because the fire makes every word sound like truth. There's always one storyteller, the griot, the keeper of memory. He or she sits closest to the flame, eyes gleaming like molten glass. Each tale begins with a phrase that commands attention. "Let me tell you," or "This happened before you were born, but after the world began to get tired." And then the past unfolds. Kingdoms, spirits, lovers, fools. Everything returns to life in the circle of light. Time, like the fire, bends toward whoever is paying attention. The best part is the laughter. That deep, full-bodied sound that always follows a lesson. Because in African storytelling, wisdom doesn't come wrapped in solemnity. It arrives wearing humor, humility, and the occasional ridiculous animal. Every flame carries its own language. The wood pops when the ancestors approve. The smoke drifts toward whoever needs the message most. And if the fire suddenly flares up for no reason, everyone knows someone unseen just joined the circle. No one's afraid. Someone just says, "Ah, welcome." That's how simple it is to live with mystery. The older people say that firelight is where you can hear the world breathe. It's where memory sits down beside you and asks, quietly, "Do you still remember me?" And when you answer yes, even silently, something inside you straightens, like a spine remembering how to stand. That's the wisdom the fire teaches, that remembering is not an obligation, it's an act of balance. That joy and grief can sit in the same light without cancelling each other out. That we are made of stories more than of flesh. The ancestors, the spirits, the saints, the ghosts, they've always been here, but they speak loudest when the world slows down enough to listen. In the firelight, they don't whisper, they hum. A low, contented sound that feels like approval. And even now, in the age of Wi-Fi and glowing screens, you can still find that hum if you look for it. Turn off the light sometime, step outside, find a candle, a lantern, or even the tiny blue flame of a gas stove. Watch it flicker. Listen. You'll feel it. The weight of generations behind you, quiet, patient, proud. Because the wisdom of the firelight never belonged to a single place or people. It's the inheritance of everyone who has ever looked into the dark and chosen to light it gently instead of chase it away. When the fire burns low, the storytellers always end the same way. They lean back, stretch, and say, "That's the story. The rest is waiting for you." Then someone adds a new log, and the circle begins again. So here we are, the fire almost out, the moon leaning low, the wind moving softly through the trees. The drums have quieted, the songs have faded into the air. Even the ghosts, I think, have gone home for the night, or whatever version of home eternity allows. You've traveled a long way tonight, across deserts, through rainforests, into cities that don't sleep and villages that never needed to. You've met dancers, dreamers, prophets, and pranksters. You've listened to the bones talk, watched ancestors walk, and followed the laughter of people who long ago made peace with the dark. And through it all, you've seen something beautiful. That Africa never lost Halloween. It simply never needed to invent it. Because what the rest of the world celebrates once a year, the nearness of the unseen, the thrill of the unknown, the warmth of remembering the dead, has always been here. It's woven into the dust, the drums, the laughter, the silence. The truth is, every African night is a conversation between worlds. The living speak, the ancestors listen. The wind carries messages, the fire answers in sparks. And somewhere between heartbeat and breath, the veil grows thin enough for love to pass through. That's the real magic. Not ghosts or ghouls, not pumpkins or potions, but continuity. The unbroken circle that says life doesn't vanish. It just changes costume. The living become the remembered become the living again. And the story goes on. Think of all the places we've been. The Nubian riverbanks where souls float downstream on firelight. The Egungun dancers of West Africa, spinning the dead back into motion. The bone throwers of the south, whispering to spirits through ivory and smoke. The monks of Ethiopia, chanting to the mountains. The desert travelers who share their campfires with jinns. The families of Madagascar, laughing as they lift their ancestors into the sun. The children in Nairobi carving watermelons and calling it Halloween anyway. And the elders in Ghana, lighting candles for those who never really left. So many ways to say the same thing. We remember. Maybe that's the oldest human instinct. Older than fear, older than language itself. The desire to keep the past from slipping away completely. To hold it somehow, in story, in ritual, in the warmth of the firelight. The Western world made Halloween about death. Africa turned it into a study of life. It never asked, what happens when we die? It asked, who do we become? And maybe that's why its ghosts are never tragic. They're busy. They have fields to bless, families to visit, stories to supervise. They are continuity with a good sense of humor. In the soft hours before dawn, you can almost feel them. Not hovering, not haunting, just lingering. A weightless presence in the air, like the smell of rain or the hum of a dream. Somewhere in a small village, a rooster crows. Somewhere in a city, a security guard sips tea, watching the streetlights blink. Somewhere in a desert, the wind picks up and carries the sound of a single drumbeat across miles of sand. And somewhere, maybe in your room right now, the night breathes a little slower, as if listening. That's how the ancestors say goodbye. They don't vanish. They wait for silence. If you could ask them for one piece of advice, they'd probably say, live gently, laugh often, leave the door open for whoever comes after you. Because that's the secret at the heart of every African ghost story. That the line between the living and the dead is not a wall. It's a handshake, and every handshake is just a promise to meet again. So as we close this long journey through haunted deserts, holy rivers, and cities full of dancing spirits, take one last look into the dark. You'll see it's not empty. It's full of memory, full of music, full of the hum of everything that's ever been loved. The night never ends. It just changes shape. Sometimes it's a shadow, sometimes a candle, sometimes a dream that follows you home. And if you ever feel afraid of death, of loss, of the unknown, remember this: you come from a world that has been practicing how to make peace with the dark for thousands of years, and it's done it beautifully. So rest now. Let the ancestors keep watch. The fire has burned low, but the glow is still warm. Close your eyes and know that somewhere under the same moon, the story continues, in laughter, in song, in footsteps returning home. Good night, and may your dreams hum softly with drums from a world that never truly sleeps.